Some of you may have seen my previous video about ending baby dick torture. And the biggest argument that we encounter is that this violates the agency, the autonomy, and the dignity of these babies. They didn't get a choice in modifying their bodies. Well, here's something else along that vein of fucked up. So, my friend Sophia Norwitz, she posted this. Her comment is, I used to be afraid of the nukes, but now I just count down into the days until we destroy ourselves. What's she responding to? An article about how a man in South Africa likes to jerk off his son. You heard that right. He likes to jerk off his disabled son. So, I'm going to read some of this. You might find it interesting. Let's start off. He says, in the last 30 years, there has been significant and substantive progress and advancement in all aspects of the lives of persons with disabilities. The progress and advancement include palliative care, physiotherapy, education, human rights, sexual recognition, and sexual rights. However, there are amongst persons with disabilities a group whose disabilities are so profound that their voices have not been heard and have not benefited from this advancement. The majority in this group of profoundly disabled persons live their lives isolated and lonely in the dark corridors of institutions or asylums or the far corners of homes and continue to be ignored, marginalized, and discriminated against. I hope that my story of the love and care that I have provided to my profoundly disabled son, specifically the recognition of his sexuality and sexual expression, will shed some light into the silent, voiceless world of persons who are profoundly disabled and will add to break the chains of ignorance and discrimination. Dare I read on? My story begins nearly 30 years ago when my wife, now ex-wife, gave birth to a wonderful baby boy named Mustafa. It was a moment filled with tears of pride and joy, as most parents feel at the birth of a son or daughter. However, our bubble of joy and feelings were shattered when we later learned that Mustafa was inflicted with a serious neurological disturbance known as profound cerebral palsy. Even though we had this heartbreaking news, I remember at the time promising to Mustafa that I would protect, care, and provide a life of happiness equal to his sibling sister, who was a year older. Although the information in this paragraph may seem mundane and familiar, it is important for you to understand the neurological and physical disorder caused by profound cerebral palsy that led to my recognition of the sexuality of my son, and will also provide a peek into the world of a profoundly disabled person. Over time, the development of my son has been painfully slow. As a result of the severity of the cerebral palsy, Mustafa has limited motor control and cannot voluntarily move his muscles, and as a result cannot walk or sit and is practically bedridden. In addition to this physical disability, Mustafa also faces profound intellectual disability, as he cannot understand and cannot verbally communicate through any language, and his ability to learn seems very limited. These disabilities put Mustafa with an IQ well below 20. It may even be unmeasurable, and is therefore classified in a medical group of persons commonly referred to as persons with profound intellectual and multiple disability, or PIMD. Given the profound disability of Mustafa, he is surprisingly healthy and has not suffered any major illnesses throughout his life. Mustafa sufficiently manages to eat his food and he sleeps well. Mustafa's hearing, smell, and sense of taste all seem normal, and he loves the outdoors, as his eyes would light up if he is taken to a new environment and would shout with excitement. As a result of the variety of communication other than verbal language, Mustafa sufficiently manages to express his physical and emotional feelings. Besides the communication that I have described, there are hundreds of nuances of communication between Mustafa and myself that forges a special bond between us, a bond that all fathers and mothers who have close relationships with their children are familiar with. It is also important to note that Mustafa's PIMD and cognitive impairment preclude him from any form of independent living and is entirely dependent on me, his father, for the constant daily care, safety, nurture, and the expression of his needs. This means Mustafa has no autonomy or capacity to understand and is unable to make any decisions concerning his health and care, nor is he able to provide informed consent to any of the care provided for by me, and this means that Mustafa is legally incompetent. At around the age of 17 years, whenever I used to bathe my son or change his diapers or apply physiotherapy and massages, my son started to express his sexual feelings by means of having an erect penis. But his sexual behavior was unlike earlier times. As he was growing up, it was a consistent sexual expression and became more acute and extended over a longer period of time. I also noticed his body pulling stiff during his moments of erection, possibly indicating a slight agitation or confusion. No shit, Sherlock. As a father who understood sexual behavior, I knew that my son was trying to express his sexual feelings because of the arousal that was happening around his body, and that this sexual behavior was no different than most teenagers encounter after puberty in their personal sexual development. I did not think it was strange because I knew my son's abilities and disabilities, and while my son had certain physical and intellectual disabilities, he certainly did not have a sexual disability. When I first encountered my son's sexual awakening, I asked myself, hang on, what should I do about my son's sexual expression? I don't know. Maybe leave it alone. It might sound crazy and all that, but if he's going to be sexual, just let him be him. If that's a thing that he can do. If he can't, then I guess he can't do it. Just because someone feels something that they may or may not have control over doesn't mean that it's your job to nudge things a bit. I decided the best thing was to see what professionals were advising parents and caregivers of children with PIMD in similar circumstances of recognizing their children's sexual awakening, and then to act on the advice given. I discovered a consensus amongst professional opinion that all persons with disabilities are sexual human beings and have equal rights to sexual expression. I also discovered that the most prevalent form of sexual expression for individuals with severe or profound mental retardation was masturbation, and that masturbatory expression was considered to be both therapeutic and important for the overall growth and development of individuals with disability. The practical advice was given that masturbation could be self-practiced or provided by a partner, and if this was not possible, then a sexual therapist or sex worker. The advice ignored and excluded persons with disabilities who could not understand or provide consent. The main reason for the exclusion was that professionals treated persons with disabilities as a homogeneous group based on their IQ score and used the standard of a profoundly disabled person as a person who was able to understand and communicate consent. This standard was used despite the vast differences of disability within the group. As Crafton Downs aptly stated, the label of profound and multiple impairment is deceptively succinct and, in numerical terms, it covers the smallest proportion of those with learning difficulties. However, the label masks the enormous diversity subsumed within it. Sexuality and profound multiple impairment. This exclusion created a contradiction of the ethics proposed that all disabled persons are equal sexual human beings, since it discriminated against profoundly disabled persons based on their intellectual capacity. On the one hand, you had professionals stating that all disabled persons are equal sexual human beings and should not be discriminated based on their disabilities. And on the other, you had professionals denying sexual therapy treatment to profoundly disabled persons because of their disability of not being able to understand or provide any form of consent. After reading and studying the advice given by professionals regarding the sexuality of persons with PIMD, it left me bewildered and perplexed, and in a sense of a no man's land. I thought the only way forward was to treat my son equally to other disabled persons and to apply professional advice given to other profoundly disabled persons, namely therapeutic masturbation, to relieve and gratify my son's sexual expression, as Mustafa's profound disability, both physically and intellectually, excluded him from practicing self-masturbation or having a partner. The only alternative was to have therapeutic masturbation applied by a sexual therapist or sex worker. However, living in South Africa, I found myself in a difficult situation or predicament regarding the professional sexual therapist or sex worker to provide for the therapeutic masturbation of my son. There are no medical or other professionals such as physiotherapists or sexual therapists providing a service of therapeutic masturbation to people with disabilities, and the only alternative was to consider the use of a sex worker. However, this option was also fraught with difficulties. First of all, sex work is illegal in South Africa. Secondly, it implied additional financial resources and the burden of payments on top of the high cost of looking after all the needs of a disabled person that I can ill afford. And thirdly, I am not aware of any sex workers in South Africa who are trained to provide for the sexual therapy requirements of persons with disabilities. It was at this stage that I soon came to realize there was no alternative way to provide the therapeutic masturbation that my son needed other than to apply the therapeutic masturbation on my own. Let's think. How about no? Really? How about no? How about you don't do that? How about, is he gonna die? Is it vital? Are there other ways to make your child happy besides jerking him off? You know your child can't consent. I remember the first day I applied the therapeutic masturbation to my son. It felt completely natural, as I already had a deep sense of intimacy with my son's body through the process of massaging him, bathing him, changing his diapers, and cleaning and touching his genitals and all other private parts. The therapeutic masturbation was a natural extension of what I was already doing in taking care of my son's body. I also remember how my son expressed a sense of relief, delight, and happiness with a smile, followed by laughter and other sounds of contentment when I applied the therapeutic masturbation. His body also succumbed through orgasm to indicate his enjoyment of the masturbation. The reaction indicated a positive acceptance of the therapeutic masturbation by my son, both physically and emotionally. The therapeutic masturbation also led to a calmness in my son's behavior, and he continues to show his contentment and happiness to all around him. Yeah, can't beat that after tug job glow, can you? Oh, I'm so happy. My son is so happy. He's beaming with joy. I just gave him a tug job. Are you kidding me? This can't be real, but it is. It's so profoundly insane. But let's read on. After the decision of applying therapeutic masturbation to my profoundly disabled son, I contemplated on my action and in the year of 2007 decided to publicly pronounce on my action. The reason I decided to make an announcement was threefold. Firstly, it was my advocacy of human rights. I felt that as a parent, I had the fundamental right to positively influence my son's sexual development, and as a father who has been personally looking after his son's health and interests since birth, I could not ignore his sexuality. Literally, yes, you could. Words fail me. Had I done nothing, I would have been failing in my duty and would not have been in the best interests of my son. Prove it. Literally prove it. How would it not be in the best interest of your son? Tell me what would have changed. How would your child have been any worse off if you had not done that? I would even argue that actually not only is it worse off to tug off your child, but now you've got a confused child who's got the weirdest relationship with you. And one has to wonder, what are the implications of this? How would you extend this, no pun intended, to other situations? Let's read on though. Secondly, I was inspired by the story of Ashley X, a severely disabled incompetent young girl whose parents opted for estrogen therapy, a hysterectomy, and breast removal, the so-called Ashley treatments, in order to reduce her projected adult weight and improve her quality of life. I felt as if I was in the shoes of Ashley X's parents, trying innovative medical treatment to try and provide her with happiness and a good quality of life. Thirdly, I felt I had a duty and responsibility not only to my child, but to all the other children with PIMD whose sexuality and sexual expression was not recognized or ignored. The initial reaction by the public when I first disclosed my action was similar to the reaction of the parents' medical treatment of Ashley X, one of shock and disgust. Gee, no shit, Sherlock. I wonder why. I wonder if maybe this shock and awe is because it is a violation of ethics, because you are abusing your role as parents. It was only when I began to explain the masturbation as a therapeutic sexual treatment that was taken in the best interests of my son's health and well-being that it changed the perception of the public that I was sexually abusing my son. No, none of that's changed. I don't think anyone in their right mind who isn't a pedophile, who isn't really royally fucked up in the head, I don't think anyone has changed their perception on this. I think any normal person realizes how completely and utterly fucked up you are. It is worth mentioning that there are a few articles by professionals concerning persons with PIMD who had no capacity to understand or provide consent, but this was mainly in the context of sexual abuse by parents, caregivers, friends, or strangers. I am in complete agreement with the ethics and laws to protect profoundly disabled persons from sexual abuse, but I would defend my action by stating that the therapeutic masturbation I am providing to my son is, by definition, not a sexual act, but a medical treatment, and would fall under the contentious ethical issue of the rights of parents to provide medical treatment to a person who cannot understand or provide consent, similar to the case of Ashley X. So, in other words, it's not sexual abuse because I say it's not sexual abuse. No, it's a medical thing. So, in other words, sex is a medical necessity, is what you're saying. So, you're on board with all the goddamn incels out there who insist that they need to get their rocks off and maybe even want to intimidate or coerce women into getting it on with them and helping them lose their virginity because they'll literally just die if they don't get their rocks off. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what seems to me what you're saying. It seems that you are profoundly insane, irrational, and just need an excuse to fondle your child. No disabled person at all needs to have their rocks off. And if they do feel the need to behave in that way, and they are of a certain age, give them their own time and space to do that in their own room. Sure, go right ahead. But if they can't do it on their own, I'm sorry, that's life. Definitely, you don't need to be doing that on your own. But the thing is, can't give consent. Cannot give consent. Just because someone enjoys it or may seem to enjoy it does not mean that that's right. The fact is, you are basically saying, this person is my child. It is my belief that it is in their interests, their health interests, to jerk them off. So what is to stop other parents from fondling their children if they look at it as a health issue, or if they justify it as a health issue? It is just insane, and I'm sorry, but you are a creep, and you need to be locked up, and your child needs to be put in the hands of the state. And I very, very rarely condone putting anyone in the hands of the state. But in this case, I'll make an exception. It is worth noting, as I read above, that this asshole was married and is now divorced. And I have no doubt that this drove a wedge in that marriage. There's just no way it didn't. Anyway, this leads us to our next story. He mentioned Ashley X, and so gonna read about Ashley fucking X. So, who the hell is Ashley X? Let's find out. Ashley X was born in 1997 in Seattle, Washington. After the first month of life, she began to display symptoms of hypotonia, feeding difficulties, chorioathetoid movements, hard to pronounce that word, and developmental delay. Consultation with all relevant specialties could identify no specific cause for her condition, resulting in a diagnosis of static encephalopathy with marked global developmental deficits. In the ensuing years, her condition has, in many of these respects, remained unchanged. She is, and in the opinion of her physicians always will be, unable to sit up, roll over, grasp objects, or speak. She must be fed through a gastronomy tube. Ashley is now 15 years old and is experiencing life with the cognitive resources typically available to a 3 to 6 month-old child. Shortly after her 6th birthday, Ashley began precocious puberty. Over a period of the ensuing 3 years, Ashley received high doses of estrogen, a growth attenuation treatment that has resulted in her remaining relatively small in stature, likely to never be larger than 4 to 6 inches, and weighing about 65 or 70 pounds. Ashley also underwent a hysterectomy and breast bud removal. This combination of medical interventions are now known, for good or ill, as the Ashley treatment. So, that's right. This asshole who jerked off his son justified all of this because some crazy family decided that they were going to modify their disabled child body. So I'm going to read a little bit about this, read some of the bullshit arguments, and confront it. The Ashley treatment has been and remains controversial. It has been over 5 years since the Ashley treatment was first described in a medical journal, but it remains a lively topic for several reasons. One reason the controversy has not gone away is that the treatment has not gone away. It is being administered in additional cases, at least 12 worldwide, and perhaps thousands of families around the world are exploring it. In the United States, the National Disability Rights Network has recently published a report which calls upon Congress and state legislatures to pass legislation which prohibits the Ashley treatment. Another reason for continued interest in the Ashley treatment is the sheer number of issues it raises. Some of these issues are primarily legal in nature. Does the hysterectomy component of the Ashley treatment constitute the involuntary sterilization of an incompetent, which, if done without prior judicial approval, is unlawful and a violation of the incompetent individual's constitutional rights? Should all highly invasive procedures require judicial approval before being performed on incompetent individuals? Or should surrogate decision makers continue to enjoy broad discretion in such matters? I think I can preemptively say, no, they should not. And it's interesting how she phrases this as surrogate decision makers, which may even mean that at some point, it's not even the call of the parents. This could very well fall into the hands of, I don't know, say the doctors. Kind of like how euthanasia has been deemed necessary in countries like the Netherlands. But let's read on. Other issues raised by the Ashley treatment are more broadly philosophical. Even if, as I have argued elsewhere, surrogates may lawfully elect each component procedure of the Ashley treatment without first obtaining judicial approval, and parents should continue to enjoy broad discretion in deciding what course of treatment is in their child's best interest, should choosing the Ashley treatment ever be in any child's best interest? It would seem that at least some commentators believe that the answer to that question is a resounding no. What I wish to suggest in what follows is that whether or not the Ashley treatment was, in fact, in Ashley's best interests, there may be cases where it could be in some child's best interests and should therefore not be strictly forbidden. Opposition to the Ashley treatment comes from many different perspectives. Many of these objections have been addressed elsewhere. However, there have been some objections raised to the Ashley treatment by very able feminist philosophers that I feel have, to date, been given insufficient attention. Since my career as a nurse has been in skilled nursing long-term care, the broad topic of disability has been of particular personal concern to me. In my working nursing life, I am a charge nurse, not a nurse manager. I take vital signs, wipe bottoms, bathe bodies, transfer patients from bed to chair, feed people who cannot feed themselves, give them their medicine, change their colostomy bags, and the dressings on their wounds, etc. I am one of those people who, to quote Martha Nussbaum, does all the work that extreme dependency requires. One could say, I suppose, that I am part of Annette Bayer's moral proletariat. Here, the contribution of feminist philosophers has been uniquely valuable, and no one book by a philosopher has meant more to me on the personal and professional level than Love's Labor by Eva Feder-Kittay. If ever there was a book by a philosopher that was for nurses, it is Love's Labor. On the one occasion I met Dr. Kittay in person, and in brief email correspondence with her, I have always felt it best to hold back my enthusiasm for this book and my personal admiration for her as a philosopher and a person, lest she think she was dealing with a madman and an internet stalker. But, was she? I mean, did she just encounter a madman? Dr. Kittay has contributed to the conversation on the Ashley treatment, but seems to have come to a different conclusion about it than I have. I find this troubling and not a little intimidating. In Dr. Kittay's case, I am truly reluctant to disagree with her about any matter of substance. I hope that, by examining our differences on the Ashley treatment, I can add something new and constructive. So, with great trepidation, here goes.
Here we go again.
There are many things that Dr. Kittay and the other philosophers like Dr. Adrienne Ash say about disability in general and Ashley's case in particular, with which I completely agree. First, Dr. Kittay writes movingly of the extraordinary possibilities inherent in relationships of care with one who reciprocates but not in the same coin. First, Dr. Kittay writes movingly of the extraordinary possibilities inherent in relationships of care with one who reciprocates but not in the same coin, one who cannot be independent but repays with her joy and her love. That seems exactly right, and I shall have more to say along those lines at the end of the post. Secondly, and specifically in regard to Ashley, Dr. Kittay writes that the philosophers, however, have made the capacity for rational thought a criterion for dignity. Those creatures who don't reach the mark are without dignity. With one stroke, the Ashleys of the world are placed below the line. We have learned the lessons that Ashley and our daughter Sesha have to teach those who create false idols of intellectual capacity. Life is precious. All individuals have intrinsic worth, the source of their dignity and joy. I think this is exactly right as well. Ashley's cognitive and other deficits do not diminish her dignity or make her life less precious. My only reservation here is with the phrase, the philosophers, as I think a number of philosophers in the Western canon have provided us with the resources to see things much as Dr. Kittay sees them, at least if I read charitably. Dr. Ash and Dr. Anna Stubblefield have written that Ashley is the same as most people. She is the same in deserving to be accepted by and respected by and loved by her family for who she is and what she will become, with no modification required. I think that is exactly, or at least mostly, right as well. Each of these philosophers is committed to the claim every child should be loved and embraced with the characteristics and capacities that they have, whatever those might be, and whether or not those capacities include the capacity for rational thought. This claim is true, and I am truly afraid, very afraid, of anyone who does not accept it. And I am very afraid of anyone who thinks otherwise as well. But I know there's going to be a but, right? With so much agreement here, how can any disagreements arise? First, Dr. Ash and Dr. Stubblefield point out that since very large people who have lost or who have never had the ability to ambulate, use their arms and hands, swallow, speak, etc., can nevertheless participate in family and community life with enough help and enough gear, like the Hoyer lift. The Ashley treatment is not necessary. I think this claim is true, but does not establish that the Ashley treatment might not sometimes beneficence. Excuse me? Sorry, I'm getting confused about that one. Do you mean benefit? Because we can and should perform any beneficent acts that are not necessary. And I think the word beneficent is not necessary in this case. Just say benefit, or is not beneficial, or is beneficial, whatever. I digress. Second, work by both Dr. Kittay and Dr. Ash and Stubblefield suggests that since it is possible to be wrong about any individual's cognitive abilities and future prospects for growth and development, the Ashley treatment was approved based on assumptions about Ashley's future that no one is entitled to make. I will argue that this second claim needs to be very carefully evaluated, and that, after doing so, it should be concluded that an assessment of our knowledge and its limits about Ashley's capacities, prospects, and inner life do not support for the conclusion that the Ashley treatment is always and everywhere wrong. Third, Doctors Ash and Stubblefield claim that medically altering any characteristic or capacity a child might have violates our duty to love and embrace that child. I would argue that this claim is false, and think it is significant that Dr. Kittay stopped short of making such a claim. Considering these claims in reverse order, I conclude that we might fully love and embrace a child with whatever characteristics and capacities they have or lack, and still conclude that their life might be, all things considered, better if one or more of those characteristics were altered. I don't, for example, think that parents who elect autoplasty for their child, a procedure that is not medically necessary, are failing to love and embrace that child, no modification required. Rather, they have simply decided that their child's life will be better if they're not nicknamed Dumbo by their peers during their formative years. I'm sorry. Are you conflating ear surgery, like cosmetic ear surgery, with removing someone's tits and vajayjay and giving them special hormone therapy so they don't develop into women? You're comparing forced sterilization to cosmetic ear surgery. I think we have a false inequality here, and I think you might want to rethink that one. Parents who have many duties that they owe to their children, of which the duty to love and embrace, no modification required, is only one. Another duty that parents have is to make choices on behalf of their children which will, if all goes well, facilitate the best possible future for them. What is more, there are some reasonably clear cases where, In order to do so, medical intervention to modify growth will be something a parent should do, and we need not look further to illustrate this point than to examine the condition that brought Ashley to the endocrinologist, Dr. Gunther, in the first instance. While the background information about Ashley's lifelong care is sometimes frustratingly incomplete, it seems that Ashley's parents obtained an endocrinology consultation due to the onset of precocious puberty, as diagnosed by her pediatrician. Girls experiencing precocious puberty will have a growth spurt and, for a time, be taller than their peer group. However, since puberty will end for them at an earlier age than would otherwise be the case, they will be shorter as adults than they would have been if puberty had been delayed. They will, in other words, never reach their full potential height. What to do? Modify their growth by administering drugs called LHRH analogs, synthetic hormones that block the body's production of the sex hormones that are causing the early puberty. The precocious puberty stops, indeed it sometimes reverses, so to speak, breasts become smaller, pubic hair disappears, etc., and then puberty begins at a more appropriate age. Should a parent authorize medical intervention to treat their daughter's precocious puberty, which sometimes occurs for no identifiable reason? Yes. There are good reasons for parents to do so, even though they might fully love and embrace their precociously pubescent daughter. Some reasons are medical. For example, mounting evidence suggests precocious puberty significantly heightens the risk of breast cancer and of mental health disorders. Other reasons are social. Precocious puberty puts girls at a higher risk for teasing and bullying. So let's just pause right there. You are comparing a procedure used to offset precocious puberty for normal children to making the parent's life more convenient by butchering that child's body. Because Ashley X was unfortunately inconveniencing her parents by being disabled. So they decided, let's prevent her from getting bigger because that's just an even bigger problem that we don't want to have to deal with. That's really the situation. But let's read on. It thus seems it is possible for a parent to fully love and embrace a child and nevertheless elect to medically alter that child, where a parent reasonably believes in doing so they advance their child's interests. Second, the claim that the Ashley treatment was approved based on assumptions about Ashley's future that no one is entitled to make might seem plausible since A, any medical diagnosis and or prognosis might be erroneous, and B, we might think we never really know what the inner life of someone else is like. I think A is true, but am unsure if knowing that it is true takes us very far when we make decisions about our health or the health of our dependents. This is specifically true in the case of prognosis, but can certainly be true with diagnosis as well. Consider the following example. Wilms tumor is a rare malignant tumor of the kidney which develops in childhood. There are clusters of signs and symptoms which lead physicians to suspect the presence of Wilms tumor. However, it is also possible that the diagnosis is mistaken. That mass showing up on the X-ray might be a benign lump of tissue known as a metanephric adenofibroma. If it is, surgery is not a medical necessity. Still, metanephric adenofibroma is an even more rare condition than Wilms tumor, and the consequences of not surgically removing a Wilms tumor are certain death. In other words, a diagnosis might be wrong, but it would nevertheless be a mistake not to accept it as true when deliberating upon what to do. The parent who decides to just hope that this is simply a case of metanephric adenofibroma would seem, at least to me, to be more than a little daft. In the case of prognosis, we are similarly unlikely to obtain the degree of certainty that the village verificationist or a knowing sophomore skeptic would say we need in order to justify a claim of knowledge. Continuing on with the Wilms tumor example, even if the tumor is excised while it is stage 1, the patient is cured in over 90%, but less than 100% of such cases. So we might not want to say that we know the child in question is cured, at least when certain epidemiologists and sophomores are in earshot. We might want to say instead that we hope that the child is cured and that the hope is not a vain and fanciful one, but rather is based on evidence, and pretty good evidence at that. With Ashley, of course, matters are not as simple. A diagnosis of static encephalopathy with marked global developmental deficits of unknown etiology is an admission that there is a lot here that medicine does not know. No one has any published explanation that I have been able to find concerning what sort of massive insult Ashley's brain received, or when exactly it occurred. Some commentators have been and are suspicious of this diagnosis and the prognosis accompanying it. Disability activist Anne McDonald remarked that in accepting the conclusion that Ashley will not significantly develop cognitively, ethicist Peter Singer has accepted the doctor's eyeball assessment of Ashley without asking the obvious questions. What was their assessment based on? Has Ashley ever been offered a way of showing that she shows more than a 3-month-old baby? I have 2 thoughts here. First, whence cometh the knowledge on McDonald's part that the physicians treating Ashley performed only an eyeball assessment? Was she there? Had she examined all of Ashley's medical records? Yes, there are reasons to think that historically medical science has, as Doctors Ash and Stubblefield have noted, often underestimated the cognitive abilities of people who appear to be profound intellectually impaired. This does not tell us that Ashley's cognitive abilities have been underestimated. Even more to the point, it does not establish that physicians and cognitive scientists are never entitled to make a prognosis like the one Ashley's physicians made, or that parents would always be wrong to accept such a prognosis and act upon it. Except when we're talking about mutilating your child. Yeah. This leads to consideration of B, above. How can we know what it is like to be Ashley with these deficits if we can reasonably conclude she has them and always will? Here I think those of us who have argued that the Ashley treatment might sometimes be beneficent have not been careful enough with our choice of words. I know that I have been guilty of saying in the past that Ashley probably has the emotional and cognitive life of a typical 3 to 6 month-old child. What I should have said is that Ashley is a 15-year-old girl who lives her life utilizing the cognitive capacities or tools available to a 3 to 6 month-old child. There is a difference between those 2 statements. What we find ourselves confronted with here, B, is a version of an old philosophical puzzle, the problem of other minds, and the favorite of the aforementioned sophomore skeptic, that wretched student sitting in the front row of my introduction to philosophy class who asks, "How do you know that grass looks the same to you as it looks to me?" I have so far always been able to resist the temptation to strangle such an individual by reflecting on the fact that, in one way or another, the pernicious meme that my mind and yours are private and accessible only to you and me has found its way, like some lethal prion, into the brains of people of true genius, and far better philosophers than me, on many occasions. This isn't the forum in which to publish the dissertation I never wrote, so I will content myself with the bald assertion that how grass looks to me and what it is like to be Ashley are not things that are known, if by know one means something like able to select the correct answer on the multiple choice exam. There are, however, many things I can justifiably believe and feel about life as Ashley lives and experiences it, and many other people for that matter, as well as non-human creatures great and small. I have a well-justified belief that Ashley is aware of her environment and responds to it. Moreover, I believe that her response to her environment today utilizes resources accumulated by her awareness of the environment in the past. For example, we are told that Ashley goes to school daily and responds to arriving there with smiles, happy sounds, and kicks. I have no reason to think Ashley forms the rational thought, "I'm in school today, just like I was yesterday. This is great." But there is good reason to believe that her acquaintance with school over time causes her to, as William James once put it, find it warm. Using the term knowledge in the context of this accumulation from acquaintance would send any number of philosophers into fits of rage, so I won't do that. But I do think we must conclude that something like it is a part of what it is to be Ashley. Ashley has feelings, which are informed by her experience over time. I'm getting tired reading. Do I even bother? Yeah. It may be that what Laplace said about the astrophysics of his day should be said about the cognitive science of today. What we know is not much. What we do not know is immense. However, not much is not the same as nothing. And among those things that we do know is that we should not dismiss the wisdom and value of feelings. For those who are inclined to do so, I recommend a dose of Martha Nussbaum's Upheaval of Thought, wherein Dr. Nussbaum makes an impressive case for understanding feelings, yours, mine, and Ashley's, as judgments of the importance of what those feelings are about to our well-being. Why attribute this sort of very rich inner life to Ashley? One good reason to do so is that we need that hypothesis to understand what Ashley does. And, I might add, this illustrates why it is very important not to think of Ashley as a 3 to 6 months old. The tools she deploys to be aware of her environment may be the tools of a 3 to 6 month old child deploys, but those tools have been deployed for the last 15 years, not 3 to 6 months. What is more, there is every reason to believe that you and I use those tools also, and that how they shape and inform who we are is every bit as important as our rational life. Since we do employ those tools ourselves, we can therefore know at least something about what it is like to be Ashley. In fact, if we accept the descriptions of Ashley and her life today provided by her family, and I know of no reason not to, we know many things about what it is like to be Ashley, and of course, her parents, siblings, and teachers know many more. We know because of our capacity for what David Hume and Adam Smith called sympathy. What music pleases Ashley, what places Ashley likes to go, that she enjoys being picked up, cuddled, and carried by her parents and her grandparents, etc. In fact, this is a phenomenon I have observed so often over the last 15 years of my life as a nurse that I've only recently begun to understand how significant it truly is. A purloined philosophy lesson hidden from me in plain sight. In more cases than I can count, I have observed adults who have lost the capacity for rational thought through Alzheimer's disease, nevertheless continue for a time to have a very rich inner life, filled with love and caring. I have seen caregivers develop a deep and rich understanding of what that person's inner life is like, and respond to that person in truly remarkable ways as a result of that understanding. I have done so myself many, many times without engaging in rational thought while doing so, or understanding the significance of what I have done. David Hume was right. The minds of men are mirrors to one another. I just want to pause and just say that something that comes up is the thought of what if we extend this kind of abuse to the elderly who have lost their cognitive abilities? Should we be modifying their bodies too? Really? I don't think so. I would argue that it is undignified. It is disrespectful to their legacy, to everything they have lived for, to all their human potential of the past and the present and the future. It is wrong to do this. So I am concerned by precedents set by permitting people to modify the bodies of those that they are in charge of, that they are watching over, those they are legal guardians to. I think this is really royally fucked up. We're not talking about a medically necessary procedure. We are talking about something that is elective and a decision that was made on the part of those who, let's face it, didn't want to be inconvenienced. And this brings me back to what I mentioned earlier about the Netherlands. For those of you who may not know, in the Netherlands, they had legalized euthanasia. And at first it was on the part of the patient and the doctor. Then they allowed the family members to make that decision with the doctors as well, especially if that person slipped into a coma. And then later on, they allow that to be the discretion of the doctors. And there have been terminations. There have even been cases, and I'll pull that up for you in a moment, where these patients have been murdered by hospital staff because the staff knew better. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, let's read on. This leads at long last to the observation by Doctors Ash and Stubblefield that there is no necessity to attenuate growth in order to facilitate good care. We do, in fact, lift, transfer, and reposition even bariatric patients on a daily basis. For over a year, one of my patients was a lady who weighed over 500 pounds, and she was up, dressed, eating lunch in the dining room, and playing bingo every day thanks to specialized equipment. She was also completely free of pressure ulcers thanks to a special bed. We hugged each other every time I came on duty. Ashley could obviously go to school, participate in family and community life, never get a pressure ulcer, receive hugs, and so forth without growth attenuation. Caring feels most genuine and rewarding when it is unmediated by the mechanical and the non-human. There is more to caring than just transferring, repositioning, providing novel experiences, cleaning, and washing. But the other thing we should conclude is that human touch is a critical component of human caring. It is comforting in ways that the mechanical is not. It is for this reason that I confess that I don't like Hoyer lifts. I do not like putting patients in a sling and lifting them like a horse you are transferring from a ship to a barge with the aid of a machine. What is more, most patients don't really like them either and will tell you so if you ask. Those who are cognitively intact will tell you so in words. Those who are not will let you know in other ways. This is not to say that Hoyer lifts and other assistive technologies are not good things. One thing that is good about them is that when the care of the fully grown adult is involved, they protect the caregiver. The fact that I do not like Hoyer lifts and did not use them as often as I should have for my own good early in my nursing career undoubtedly helps to account for the 2 ruptured discs in my back that caused me constant discomfort, have necessitated 2 emergency room visits, and may, in the not too distant future, place me in the ranks of the disabled as well. And of course, many patients understand the wisdom of mechanical lifts. They are nice people who do not want their caregivers to sustain injuries. Sometimes a patient will insist that I, the nurse, use the lift because they have come to deeply care about me, one of the many rewards that nursing offers. Nevertheless, neither of us like the damn things. One big idea that seems to be distinctly feminist is Eva Katay's observation that Western philosophy has made a false idol out of the intellectual capacity for rational thought, singling it out as the sine qua non for dignity, value, and worth, even if, as I maintain, there are historical figures in philosophy who were not utterly bewitched by reason. Spinoza, Shaftesbury, Hume, and Smith come to mind. This feminist critique of the Western philosophical canon gets the theme right, starting with Plato and Aristotle, and with no clear end in sight. If I am reading them accurately, Doctors Ash, Stubblefield, and Katay suspect that the defenders of the Ashley treatment think growth attenuation is appropriation for individuals who do not have, and never will have, the capacity for rational thought, and are therefore just repeating the same damn mistake old dead white men philosophers have made for the last 2,500 years, with perhaps a few honorable exceptions. And there you have it, intersectionalism woven in to this shoddy argument for why it's acceptable. Do I have to finish this? Do I really have to finish this? Defenders of the Ashley treatment, they suspect, are viewing those lacking reason as less than the rest of us, and so we can do things with them and to them that we cannot do with and to those possessed of reason. Eat them, ride them, make them pull plows, lock them in cages, attenuate their growth, etc. Perhaps defenders of the Ashley treatment are, one might say, unjustifiably privileging reason over other ways of being in the world. I, as one of those defenders, plead not guilty. For surely, when we stop worshipping at the altar of the false idol of reason, we should become better able to value the role that the other feeling way of being in the world plays in our life and the lives of others. We should better comprehend what Ashley tells us, because Ashley does tell us things. Among many other things, Ashley tells us she loves tenors, school, and being picked up, held and carried by those whose touch she finds comforting and warm. We might feel that if the only way of being in this world for Ashley is the feeling way, then Ashley might be able to experience greater joy and love as a small woman than a large one when other factors such as being unable to swallow, turn over, or grasp objects are also part of who she is. If so, helping Ashley to be a small woman is not a failure of love and acceptance, but of an act of love and acceptance. In defending the availability of the Ashley treatment, my intention is to privilege, not reason, but feeling as a way of being in the world. I want to think, even if Dr. Kate cannot agree, that those who have elected the Ashley treatment for Ashley have done so not because they worship a false idol of reason, but because instead each time they pick her up in their arms and hold her, they experience in a unique and special way exactly what Dr. Kate describes, the extraordinary possibilities inherent in relationships of care with one who cannot be independent but repays with her joy and her love, and that Ashley does also. If so, they worship, if that is the word, at a different altar, one not consecrated to some jealous god called reason, and I see no compelling reason to forbid it. So, there you have it. We're talking about the shoddiest argument for why it's okay to de-sex a child. De-sex a child so that she cannot grow up to be an adult because it is a matter of inconvenience. Because it is so much easier, so much infinitely easier to take care of a small child who will always be your little baby than it is an adult. These people are shitty parents. They don't want to have to deal with reality. They would rather fashion reality on their own terms. And that means violating the dignity, the autonomy of an incompetent girl. And the precedence that this sets is staggering. And so this story, combined with the other story, basically says that if you are a parent and you decide that you want to violate your child by either jerking your child off or by modifying their body, it's okay. Whatever's okay. It's a special situation. It really is a special situation. So let's go right ahead, because why not, for shits and giggles? I have a problem with this kind of behavior. People who do this to their children are abusing their children. They're abusing humanity. This is a violation of humanity. We are talking about crimes against humanity. And these assholes don't even realize it. And they are promoting it. They're advocating it. And then you have people like the author of this shit article, which ended up being my first search result, thanks to Google. They end up speaking up on their behalf, condoning it, encouraging it, that maybe it's okay. It's not okay. So this is how shitty things have gotten in the West. Now, none of this is new stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. This isn't something that just happened today. This isn't something that happened last year. We're talking about something that happened well over a decade ago, maybe almost 2 decades ago, actually. In both cases, I believe. But it's being published. It's actually been picked up by some mainstream media articles. Psychology Today is pretty mainstream when it comes to psychology. It's interesting how this author didn't even talk about the effect on other people, how this might actually affect their own well-being. And how it'll affect their own well-being is, if you can do this to a child, you can do this to an animal. You can do this to an adult, maybe your parents, your brother, whoever is in your care. You can violate their dignity because you deem it justifiable. I know this is going to sound like a slippery slope, but let's just be honest. Every time the slippery slope argument comes out regarding something crazy like this, it's fucking justified. It's actually come out to be true. Even the shit that they talk about when it comes to the trans rights activists, actually. The trans rights activists have absolutely justified every horror that was prophesied by those with their slippery slope arguments. And one has to wonder what other things you can justify when it comes to your kids, if you think it's for their well-being, such as parading your child out like a drag queen, for example. Having them go through photo shoots with naked men because you think that's beneficial to their well-being. The sexual, or even maybe let's go back to the sexual rights as discussed by the asshole who jerked off his son. You have schools promoting this in the UK. That's how fucked up things have gotten. It's so one thing leads to another. Slippery slope argument, right? One thing's to lead to another and it escalates. We are actually seeing that happen throughout the West. And so I just want to highlight these insane stories that make some people, at least in the case of my friend Sophia Norwitz, want the world to burn over this. This is insane shits. And I don't see the West getting any better. I don't see enough people challenging this. And we really should. These kinds of behaviors add up. They manifest. You get psychologists picking up this shit, eating up this shit. Liberal psychologists who think, well, if we could do it in this case, why not plug it in here? And maybe plugging it in there is not the safest place or the most ethical place to plug it in. And maybe they should go plug themselves. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'll leave it there. I know this is a long video and it's taking me forever to edit. But at least now you've learned something. Do you feel enlightened? Do you feel better off knowing this? Or is this something that you would have rather never known? For me personally, ignorance would have been bliss, but it is what it is. Anyway, if you did like this video, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing below. Thank you.